Thank you, Noelle. And yes, my husband is available for legal assistance if anybody wants. I can give you guys his cell phone number while you're dancing if you have any if you need any legal advice. The Teddy Talks. So the reason why we decided to sort of mix things up a bit with our conference and have what we're calling Teddy Talks is because the goal of this conference is to sort of try to, as it was with the CAT Center, push technology, especially push technology innovation and how that can affect learning, assessment, measurement, and education in general. So what I decided to do when I was preparing for chairing the Teddy sessions and trying to help give guidance to our speakers, I took a look at Times magazines, actually, their covers, to get a sort of sense, a measure of what the public perception and sort of coverage was about education and learning. And so, let's see. Times change, do they? Sadly, they don't, at least not in education. But I'm going to go wireless. And I looked at I used 4 keywords: education, learning, technology, and innovation. And this is what I saw. Went 3 decades, looked in the 80s, and these were the magazine covers that came up for education and learning. We were fixing our schools then, and the Asian Americans, they were the whiz kids, and we decided we were going to get tough, right? And in the 80s, that was the time of hardware, right? So Bill Gates, Apple, and this is what was happening in the 80s. Then you get to the 90s, schools, again. We still had hope for our public schools. We were now questioning whether being tough on our kids, whether that was the right thing, and maybe we should not give them that much homework. But instead, in the area of innovation and technology, we were moving into cyberspace. And Gregory Chung was very impressed that I did find the magazine cover, I think it was 1993, Greg? The Person of the Year cover, which was the computer. So you can see, 2 decades, not much has changed in technology, but a lot has changed in innovation. I mean, not much has changed in education, but a lot has changed in technology and innovation. The past decade, same thing. In technology, what has been pervasive is mobility, connectivity. The fact that we can now access technology anytime, anywhere, and hopefully anyone. But in education, yet still things haven't changed. In fact, what's the laser pointer again? If you take a look at this cover here, that is the headline is How to Build a Better Student for the 21st Century. But take a look. It's a chair attached to this old-fashioned desks with an apple on it. And so you can see that the messages and the perceptions of what education is in the public doesn't seem to really match, or they've never really come together with what's been going on in other areas of the world. So why do we bring these speakers today? The purpose of the conference was to figure out how can we actually transform this area? How can we take everything we've been doing in technology and education, and in fact what we haven't built yet, but the ideas that we've all been coming up with, and ideas that haven't yet been established, and use those to truly transform our educational experience. And we're hoping that with this conference, as part of it, that's about to change. So what my goal, at least what I would love to come out of this conference, would be that we would be able to take the educational problems that we haven't solved in the past 3 years and actually use that to drive innovation in technology rather than the other way around. And hopefully our speakers, our TEDdy Talk speakers, will help us start that foundation. So we've brought together a diverse set of speakers. They're from education industry. Some are actually in schools. Others are in policy. And their goal is to kick off the conference. And hopefully they'll spark some conversations, and then they'll generate some ideas. And together, hopefully, with the TEDdy Talks and the connections we'll make here and the ideas that will come out of this, we'll be able to actually make some change. And by doing so, my goal, and what I would love to see, is finally a magazine cover that actually looks like this, where we've got all of our students finally graduating, which, of course, we still haven't seen. We've seen the dropouts, we've seen that we're flunking our kids, but no pressure to you TEDdy Talk speakers. I'm not expecting you to completely solve all our problems, but I think you guys will help us take a first start. So to give you guys some introduction of the format, each speaker only gets to speak 200 seconds, and they don't get to touch any of the technology, except for the microphone if they'd like. Joanne here is Time Master, and she was chosen for that role because she's very good at it. And the slides are just going to advance. And they're going to tell us, they're just going to speak their minds and maybe dance for you, sing. We'll see. I know several of them have been up since 3 o'clock in the morning, and I won't look at anyone in particular, but we do ask, because they do have such a short period of time to speak, that you hold your questions until after they're done. Okay? And with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Tom Andriola, who is the Vice President and Chief Information Officer for the University of California System. We like the UC system. And he oversees the information technology function. He helps guide our system-wide technology initiatives, and he provides the leadership for the development of a long-term strategic vision for technology and digitization at the UC. And let's see, and I'm going to pass the mic over to you.
I'm going to use that one right now.
Oh, okay, well then.
What they didn't tell us is Joanne's got a water gun and she's going to squirt us if we go over in our time, so a little extra pressure. Okay. So this is a story of 3 siblings. One night as they chatted, who knew, and her 2 older brothers, their hair gray and matted. Their conversations vivacious, never ending in glee. But this night, they found some things they could agree. They agreed students had the same questions coiled in their head and kept them sleepless while they slept in their bed. Who knew pointed out, things haven't really changed. Students attend classes, they take tests, and they're still very strange. But for them, technology, their tweets and their vines, they're not just tools. It's their identity it defines. And look at the innovation. Collaboration abound. Virtual classrooms and all types of sounds. Data sets visualized, and we're just going to keep going. Okay, but who knew? He said, come on, you've all heard this before. When we were kids, I predicted the score. My headset you laughed at. But today, a product it is. Interacts on. It senses the brain waves. Think of the potential it gives.
Dad, where are you?
Oh, my son Evan. Evan, why are you calling me? I'm doing a presentation.
Mom's not here. She's at work.
Well, you're going to have to call, Google Uber Auto Vehicle to give you a ride to practice, okay?
I gotta go.
And make sure.
The other line.
Students don't change, do they? Okay, so let's get back in the head. Okay? Libraries should come to our students instead. And books, be they digital or hard copy bound, should be instantaneous as music that we now listen in sounds. This guy was pensive, not much for bliss. He said, imagination is the key to all this. The key is for students to be inside the novel and to design our games to be something, I don't know. Okay. All right. But then he said something we shouldn't look past, which is it's teachers who inspire and make education and knowledge last. What if high tech were as inspiring as Nolly? Inspiring, interactive, responsive, and I can't think of the fourth one. Okay, but let's not forget what it's about. It's helping these students figure it out. And there you go.
That's one of the best poem ever. Thank you very much with your.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. That was impressive. Our next speaker is Gino Flores. He's coming home. He was a former CRESST project coordinator. And he also was he served as the Chief Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of California and was responsible for our state's assessment system and the accountability system for the federal, state, and state compliance. And with that, we'll launch Gino's. Do you want to use this mic or?
I'll use this one.
Okay.
Oh, I can't touch that.
Yeah, no, not the technology. No. Set.
Well, I'm excited to be here to talk about the future because, that's where I hope to live the rest of my life. But I can't help but be clouded by the present and the past and thinking about how we got here today. Because wasn't it just yesterday we were all celebrating the anniversary of the internet? And because of the internet, you could actually touch the future and live in the future. And I remember getting that little disc in the mail because I had 25 free hours to touch the future. Remember? And that sound you're hearing, well, that was the sound of the future. And it was filled with a cornucopia of sights and sounds and ideas and anything you could think of. If you had an imagination and creativity, you could make anything happen, and now it has. And apparently everybody could do it except for children. Because for some reason, we didn't really allow children to touch the tools, lack of hardware, lack of infrastructure, lack of knowledge on how these things actually work to help children. And aren't children really the ones who are the most innovative and creative in our society, the best creatures on the earth who can think of things to come? Well, it turns out we as adults really just needed to build better systems to help provide this information more efficiently so somebody could do something with it. And today, I think, we're moving into the future where the real question is sort of a twist on the Watergate question of what did you know, when did you know it, and now what did you do about it to help children learn better? And we already are very excited about how across the country, PARC and SBAC are going to do online assessments, but there are companies that I know of who've already been doing this work for some time. There's a company that completed 45 assessments last year, and every day produce about 1.9 million quizzes. Now, we don't have to worry about robots and technology tools taking over learning because it is still a people business. And no matter what, we need people helping people to understand concepts more clearly and readily infuse them into their daily life. And this is really important because if we don't help advance our society, then what's the reason for anyone to ever want to come visit us if there's no real intelligent life here on Earth? So here's what I say to all of you who are out there. I urge you as participants in the audience to usher in the future more quickly to our children. So researchers and higher ed types, get your work out much faster so schools and teachers and principals can understand it. You could still write in your report, more work needs to be done, but help somebody to understand what you're thinking. And for corporate types, I would say, get your product out quicker, faster, more efficiently so people can have it, especially little people. Because when we put these tools in their hands, they not only touch the future, they really live and develop in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you, Gina. Our next speaker is Cheryl Hine, who is a female engineer, and she has been a PI for a number of research programs funded by the Department of Ed, Boeing, and DARPA, and most importantly, she has one of her honors is that she has received the DARPA Miles Per Watt Award for effective use of government research dollars, which we can all learn a lot of lessons from Ms. Hine, and she'll be going next. Do you want to use the podium? Or?
Yeah. Okay, it's nice to be here with you. So I'm interested in the process of becoming expert. We know something about this. It takes deliberate practice, coaching, and a top-down focus. Those are important. We need a 20-second slide switch. There we go. Okay, so he didn't get this good at juggling by clocking hours, tossing things into the air. What we do in the time we have matters. What fascinates me most is how we could improve becoming expert using science and technology. So I get paid to think about how to improve the ways we train surgeons. I work at CASET at UCLA, which is a advanced surgery technology development center. It hasn't changed much for 100 years. They apprentice to masters, and they gradually learn to cut open the human body and reshape it from the inside. Traditional education tends to focus on learning facts and tasks. Becoming expert requires more: to see patterns, to classify, filter, to perceive what's important, to recognize what's not and ignore it, to be fluent, to perform well in real-world settings. Surgery and interventional medicine are perceptual performance disciplines. So my dream is a system that tends to that engages you to seek understanding, that teaches you what you don't know, that ensures retention, that offers mentoring from masters, that measures you against objective criteria, that helps you become as good as you want to within your genetic potential. It systematically stresses you with realistic conditions and becomes useful for life, for rehearsal, for refreshing, for integration of new skills, for recertification, and so on. Wow. So I don't yet know how to make this dream real, but there are some key pieces, like those simulators, that we know enough about to believe in the dream. So here are the main pieces that I've identified, about a dozen parts from the science of learning, simulation technology, and domain expertise, a big, ambitious set of stuff to integrate into a system. When we develop new technologies, they go through a predictable maturing phase. Something like we dream, we dig around, we try some things, we make some things, and eventually we merge them together. So we can pop our dozen parts into a system maturity space that looks something like this, and then we can analyze the maturity of each component and see where we've got work to do. So do we just have the concept, or do we have some parts that we can merge together? There's another view here of the technology maturity space. At CASET, this is our educational frontier. Whether you are a fellow explorer or whether you're a master guide, I really look forward to the next 2 days of being on this journey with you. Thank you.
And our next speaker is Chris Mosier. He is from the Archer School of Girls, and he has extensive experience in as a teacher and technology coordinator in K through 12. Prior to education, he was the co-founder of a web development firm that built solutions for clients such as FedEx, World Bank, and Capitol Records, and more importantly, at least in my view. He's a freelance writer for NASCAR, so I can't wait to talk to him more about that. But he's going to talk to you right now about education. So here we go. You're welcome. Do you want rodeo?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to speak about NASCAR with anyone who's interested after this talk. Thank you very much for having me here. It's an honor. So, in 1964, two Bell Labs scientists turned their eye to deep space. What they did was to take their radio telescope and turn it in that direction. So these two researchers, Penzias and Wilson, began collecting data, and they realized very quickly that their data had been tainted by some sort of low-level static, some frequency that was tainting this data. They worked for over a year to attempt to find or reconcile or essentially just remove this static that existed. It was only through the help of a third member, physicist Robert Dicke, that they realized that this low-level static was actually one of the greatest scientific discoveries of the 20th century. That static signal that they had treated as interference was actually the radiation signature of the Big Bang. So often in our educational systems, I find parallels to that story. We design these digital learning systems, and we design them in such a way that there's a linear progression for the student learners. There's a correct answer that we're pushing them towards. So in that space, as they move through that linear progression, we treat their misconceptions or mistakes as incorrect answers, as static that we attempt to eliminate or factor out of that space. Now, my talk today, the title of it, comes from a book by Eleanor Duckworth, The Having of Wonderful Ideas. Eleanor Duckworth, who had studied and worked with Jean Piaget, has as her kind of main philosophy the notion that the teacher or instructional system serves the role of researcher. So she advocates for a position where instead of teaching the content from the teacher's perspective, they provide an intellectually rich or fascinating experience and then put that so that the learner is in direct contact with that information. The role of the teacher or the instructional system is then merely to engage and attempt to encourage the curiosity of that learner to pursue their ideas. Now, having been in K-12 education from elementary all the way now to high school, that I've seen a lot of digital learning systems that our students use. And in those current systems, what happens is that the learner's answers are treated as correct or incorrect by that system, that they serve as the validator for whatever the student's ideas are. These softwares position the curriculum as something that needs to be covered in that linear path. And by separating the learner from the curriculum, it creates a false dichotomy. So what I'd like to see is systems that imbue critical exploration into this design, that the intellectual content comes directly into the hands of the learner so that they can follow a personal journey wherever that particular learning takes them. Now, the power of these generative ideas, focused questions, and student interest is evocative. The approach engenders intrinsic motivation and propels these students to become lifelong learners. So we need to look to build these systems that value the learner's wrong ideas as part of that cycle of inquiry. Now, many folks that are far smarter than I have been attempting to tackle these questions, and many of them are in this room here. So I'm excited to see what happens over these next 2 days. I'd highlight the work of Universal Design for Learning out of the CAST group in Boston as one approach to that, which attempts multiple representations and diverse pathways of that content. But I believe with thoughtful questions and meaningful materials, we can reorganize K-12 digital learning to encourage learners to pursue very powerful ideas that are personally meaningful. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Amy Cruz from Intific, and Amy is she's an evangelist for the fusion of neuroscience technologies with advanced software development. But prior to Intific, she was a program officer with DARPA and Office of Naval Research, and she also is her Intific. And she was our game development partner for Engage, which I'll be talking about later. And
Absolutely.
She'll be demoing. So with that, go.
Off we go.
Ready?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I wanted to actually talk to you today about something that I've been thinking about quite a bit as both a neuroscientist as well as now a software developer at Intific. And that is the fact that there are a lot of fundamental skills that I think that could be taught through games and game interactions. One of them is the idea of self-control. We know from the literature now that self-control is actually one of the greatest predictors of childhood success later in life, regardless of socioeconomic status and background. And there are actual brain networks that we know are active in self-control and the development of self-control, both in students as well as, in young children, as well as later expression in adulthood. Neuroscientists have spent a lot of time studying these networks, and obviously behavioral geneticists, psychologists, health researchers, everyone has been sort of implicating self-control as a skill that can actually be influenced and have a big impact later in life. So the question was, what might help children develop self-control? Short-term memory training may help, but there aren't very many good games, I think, for teaching fundamental skills. I think we've seen in the literature now, and this is something that's developing quite rapidly, both through our own work as well as the work of others, is that games can change brains. We are seeing evidence in the neuroscientific literature of plasticity and the impact that games can have on the plasticity of the brain. One of the reasons I think for that is that games can actually provide very engaging content in a way that some students in particular who may be in more impoverished environments do not really have access to. It provides a space for imagination, it provides a space for exploration that they just may not have through any other means. And I think there is something to be said for that sort of immersive experience. So my charge to the group, myself included, is that I would like to make games, compelling games, that teach kids self-control. There are many games with fantastic educational content out there, and we should continue that work. But I think if we really want to address some of the fundamental issues in childhood education and success later in life, that we should approach that. I think there are many articles on how to improve self-control in children, but many students, particularly those, again, in impoverished environments, just won't have the mentoring or the reinforcement of those skills without something that they can actually take in their own hands and interact with. So my charge to the group is let's make these games and give them away for free. So it's not that expensive. I'm a software developer. I've spent a lot of time studying the budgets. I know what can be done. The Anytime, Anywhere education program that we participated in with the Gates Foundation was a deep inspiration for me. I think that children should be able to be reached anywhere. So please join me on saving the world. I'll be at table 20 in the demo room during the demos if you want to talk about it further. So thanks so much. Look forward to interacting with you.
And next we have David Belinsky, who is the co-founder of Immersion Learning Company. David is an amazing medical illustrator and animator. You'll see that with his images. He is a 2-time presenter at the TED Conference, so this should be a piece of cake for you. And where he presented his the animation, The Inner Life of a Cell, which is actually how I was introduced to him, because I was told that that was some people said that was the only way they truly understood how how cells worked. It wasn't until they saw his animation. So with that, we'll go ahead.
Hi guys, thanks Gurley for inviting me. I appreciate it. The inspiration for me early on as a child was cave paintings that I saw at 10 years old at Lascaux and Chateau Pontarc. If you can see the cave paintings are really amazing. They're realistic. They are true products of ardent observation. And if you look at that central creature, that moving rhinoceros, I would have to say that that's probably the very first game animation. It inspired me to go into scientific illustration. And I went into scientific illustration, ended up at Yale, where I produced several thousand pen and ink illustrations, but I wasn't satisfied. And I thought back to those forebears of mine, our cousins who so cleverly invented visual communication, and I felt that I really needed to do the work that I wanted to do by making it move. So I started the first medical animation company in the world, computer medical animation company in the world, left Yale to do that, and then I taught myself how to use a computer. Wrong order. But nonetheless, what it ended up leading to was, as Gurley had mentioned, this animation for Harvard called The Inner Life of the Cell. That animation was never meant to be seen by more than 10 people. It was never meant to be seen by more than a small classroom of molecular and cellular biology students at Harvard, and they were divided into two. Half the class got the 8.5-minute animation that we did, and the other half of the class all the class got the didactic lecture material. Half the class saw our animation, and the test at the end was remarkable. The students who saw the animation scored nearly 100% on the exam. The students who had only the classroom material scored around 70%. That's way far beyond the standard deviation. And so we decided to let the animation out into the world, and it took the world by storm, and it took our server down every day for about 4 months because our website hits went from about 50 a week to 600,000. And what I found out was from teachers all over the world, from middle school teachers, high school teachers, and students, that the complexity that we put into this animation was what really charged the students. And students were asking for more complexity. They were asking for more things that would challenge their innate intelligence instead of being dumbed down as naive learners. And so that inspired me to take this one step further and begin a company that would begin to create very sophisticated interactive animations for students. We're starting out with med students, but we'll eventually bring that downstream to bring very high complexity game-style interactive education for science for the mainstream students, and hopefully get it around the world. So I'll need your help. Thank you very much.
Next up, we have Allison Levy from Game Up Brain Pop. And she is, her background actually is in the classroom, mother of two. But she joined Brain Pop in 2007, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Brain Pop. I know my children talk about it all the time. So she's here, and she's going to go ahead and speak.
Thanks. This is good. Yeah. Okay. How many, just very quickly, how many of you are from a university game design program? How about teachers, researchers, policymakers, other game developers, other? Okay. Okay. Well, we know that there are amazing games coming out of university game design programs. UCLA CRESST, of course, Rice University, GLS at University of Madison, Wisconsin, NMSU's Learning Games Lab, etc. But the question is, how do we get those amazing games in front of kids and teachers? So what happens when the grant is over? Do you move on to the next game, or does your game continue to live on? A lot of games don't have a publishing strategy in mind when they're developed, and weren't designed with common classroom risks being considered. Things like using sound controls to make it easier for teachers to use. So what if there were a pipeline connecting universities developing these learning games with kids and teachers, and a hub where universities could look to for advice? You could close your eyes for a moment and imagine this, okay? So having a resource to tap into for things like what topics teachers are requesting games for, to help teachers figure out where the games fit into their curriculum. Questions like those. Also, how best to tackle support materials, things like lesson plans, video clips, assessment tips, teaching strategies, graphic organizers to help scaffold the game for students. So imagine a game that you or your university students created, reaching a huge audience, perhaps larger than you even intended it to reach, being played by millions of other students. This is applicable even if you're not a university game design organization. And having the ability to refine different iterations of your game at scale. And we've started doing this with a few of our university partners, University of Washington's game Refraction, Battleship Numberline from Play Power Labs out of CMU. So we're wondering, what is the best way to get great games in front of teachers and kids? And this is something that we're really interested in continuing to develop, and we'll be here for, I'll have a table in the demo room as well, and I would love to talk to you about it if it's something that you're interested in getting involved in. Thanks.
Next, we have Joe Wise from New Road School. Joe has actually, I think, known me since I was 21, 22. He has been an educator for a very long time and has actually not only just an educator, but also participated in a lot of our research with the psychology lab, with UCLA, with ourselves. And he is the developer of the Center for Effective Learning at New Roads, as well as this very amazing tool called the Learning Tool. And more recently, he has partnered with Game Desk, and they have instituted the Playmaker School at New Roads, and hopefully you guys will get to talk to him about that. And with that, we'll hear from Joe.
Good morning, everyone. Can't say that I'm not just a little bit scared at this format, but let's give it a shot, okay? Okay, so first of all, when we look at this slide, you'll see the curriculum has been forced upon our young people in a way that doesn't really match life experiences. So transfer really isn't a natural outcome, and if we're looking at transfer as being a natural outcome, shouldn't we in fact develop a curriculum such that transfer is an expected outcome? And so I would argue from a science experience, we have this thing called a forced oscillation. So you can force an oscillation. Anything can be forced to oscillate at any frequency, but when you take that force away, the oscillation stops. So what we really need to do is we need to start looking at how can we develop a curriculum and how can we use technology so that we can in fact define and manage a curriculum that has a natural frequency, a natural resonance that integrates information with the natural outcome of transfer. So one of the things that we've done with the Playmaker School at New Roads is that we've developed this idea of learning toolkits. Is that going that fast? Sorry. Okay, so the learning toolkits, and so we've identified 4 things. If problem solving is the goal, curriculum should be organized around problem solving. And so problem solving, people naturally use observation, grouping, and define and nomenclature. They also look at deconstruction by looking at authors, by looking at the intention, by audience, deconstruction. They also utilize social skills, beliefs in government, commerce, all of these kinds of things to come up with problem solving. And they use systems where they identify variables and develop relationships. So if we use this content, it should be used to drive opportunities to extract meaning. And by an example of this, if we put the content on top of this curriculum, an example would be learning to write a paragraph. And so we have particular organization of a paragraph. We give students 20 different paragraphs, and we use their expertise to then use taxonomy to determine what a good paragraph is. And sure enough, they come out with the topic sentence, they come out with organized ideas, and they come out with a conclusion. They use their expertise to do this as opposed to us teaching them in that way. So let's see, where are we now? Okay, wow, moved kind of fast. So we've been taught that you have to be taught in order to understand a particular thing, that you have to be taught to know it. And I would argue that within 5 questions, I could probably guide each of you in this room to explain how light travels through a window and not through a wall, based on information that you already know and already have. So our current system is like a student presenting the measles, going to the doctor and presenting measles, but the doctor happens to be treating for colds that week. That's not a very good model. It's kind of like my granddaughter My daughter gives her a week to learn potty training. If she doesn't have potty training, we move on to using a fork. This really doesn't make any sense, but yet it's what we use in our current curricular structure. So we should, in fact, though, take care because technology can be utilized in many ways, but we need to take care that the technology doesn't fall into the trap of just providing content, and that we don't just make the students consumers, but use technology to do it. We want to make sure that we use the technology to provide opportunities for students to create, for them to extract meaning and create learning. And that's what really the 21st century skills are all about. And so now I wake up in the morning and I wonder, what would it be like without school as we know it? And is there a way that we can reimagine school as not being school? I think that's it, right?
So sorry for that. Next, we have Jody Asbel-Clark from the teacher from a researcher from the Educational Gaming Environments Group at Turk in Cambridge, and she's right now leading. She's leading a team of game designers that are researching and designing games, social digital games, as learning environments that span both home, community, and school.
Will the videos work?
Fingers crossed that they will.
Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about implicit learning, data, and games. Because this is how we learn. We learn implicitly. We learn by testing our world, exploring around us. We master, and we delight in mastering the difficult. And sometimes we stretch a little bit out of our comfort zone and we stumble, but that just makes us more persistent. It makes us try harder. It makes us tackle new challenges, because all we really want to do in life is level up. And so what we have to do is give experiences like games, because this is exactly how we learn in games. We try something, it doesn't work. We try something else, it doesn't work. After repeated failures, we start to look at patterns and we draw lessons from our play. And it's only when we see these patterns and we see all this experimentation culminate in strategies that we can figure out what it is we have to do to succeed and level up. Games are sticky. They get us to persist. Games also generate data. Every click is recorded. And in my world, sticky plus data means research. We can watch people learn. We can watch the patterns they develop as they grow strategies in a game. Because after all, any good game is an opportunity to explore a new world, new mechanics, new tools. And in that setting, we say, hey, what can I do with these tools? How can I solve these problems that are put forth in front of me? How can I can use these game mechanics to do things I didn't even know I was able to do. And we learn this way before we put words to it, before we put formalizations to it. So what if we can develop games that are both sticky and also the game mechanics mirror real science concepts from real world, like motion, gravity, Newton's laws, and we collect all the back-end data. We see every click a player makes, when they do things correctly or strategically, what strategies they build over their repeated failures, and we can watch that growth over time. And when we can do this, we also can listen to what they're saying, and we hear what they're doing implicitly before they know. Because maybe Einstein figured out the formalizations of riding a bicycle as he was learning to do it, but most of us, we build our subsidiary experiences in the real world. And it's educators that need to build those formalizations from those experiences. Games themselves don't live in an island. Educators need to make those bridges, and parents and learners and players themselves need to actively make those bridges. But in a world where there's so much haptic learning coming on with Connect, there's physiological, psychological, and neurological devices controlling games and getting data from games, and augmented reality that blurs real and virtual worlds, all these are generating data. We can get that implicit learning from all of these and leverage those for assessments. Thank you.
Next, we have Rich Brown, also formerly from CRESST. And Rich's background is in psychometrics and testing, and he has served on numerous technology advisory committees, but more importantly, he's also done a lot of work in test alignment and has served on the National Assessment Governing Board as a reviewer and advisor of the college readiness exams such as the SAT. And with that, thanks.
First, thanks, Gurley and Greg, for inviting me to be here. One of the advantages of going late in the batting order is I can just say, yeah, what they said. Because a lot of what's been said already is things that I'm going to try to talk about. But effectively, when I went through this context and this way of doing it, we're looking at trying to summarize this up in 200 seconds. And the first time I ran through it, the first 3 words I come up with to summarize it, I can't share in polite company. But the second, and third, and fourth, and 10th time I went through it, I came up with a summary of 3 things, and that is context, competencies, and collaboration. And when we look at the future of assessments, we're looking at how technology provides a context, whether it be in virtual realities, augmented realities, simulations, that allow us to gather a lot of information and data. And through that process, lots of different types of data can be obtained kind of unobtrusively through, again, through wearable technologies, things like Google Glass and other kinds of things. The issue then is to take that data and as part of the process, assess the competencies that we're interested in dealing with. And performance tasks and simulations can actually address these competencies, whatever those competencies might be. And the competencies could be in a specific domain for academic knowledge, but it also could be performance tasks that provide information about how well you make decisions, 21st century type of skills, and those kinds of things. And so the key is that we map out these competencies that we're trying to assess in such a way that we have our hierarchies that provide us with learning progressions, they provide us with developmental sequences, they provide us with ways of identifying how we move from one state of knowledge to another state of knowledge. And if we embed those into the context, then we have measures of where we are, and that allows us then to move forward and measure progress along the way. In order to do that, we have currently psychometric models that allow us to do it. There's advances in the psychometric models in the last several years of looking at these classification models so that we can develop estimates of competencies or expertise in these competencies that are more of a mastery rather than just a scale score level. And what that gives us is ideas of which of the competencies that are necessary have been mastered by the respondents. And as you progress through the process, you can see how well you increase and develop those things. Now, the good thing about these cognitive models, cognitive diagnostic models, latent classification models, is that they give us more actionable information. We take all the data that's gathered through all these different contexts, and we turn it into information that's actionable. In other words, it allows us to identify strengths and weaknesses. It allows us to identify areas of concentration. It allows us to look at places for remediation. And in doing that, we get a sense of what we need to do next in order to move along in that progression. The advantage is this, is that by embedding and collaborating with psychometric approaches along with the development process, we can move forward and get a better sense of not only where the students are, but what it is they currently understand, what they currently don't understand, and what we can focus on to help move them along in order to make the future of assessments currently available to us now. We can make the reality a current day reality and not wait for it to happen down the road. Thank you very much.
Next, we have Sasha Barab from Arizona State University. Needs no introduction, of course. But his expertise is in the area of gaming and technology in education, and I'd like to say that his game Quest Atlantis is sort of the modern day Oregon Trail in both research and in the schools. And so with that.
Great. Thank you, and I agree, following everyone. It kind of, I was just like, wow, yeah, what they said. And when you started your initial intro, I was thinking about a triple helix, where we also had like learning sciences as one of the arms. So my name is Sasha Barab, and I'm going to talk about the power of games for impact, which is a multi-million endeavor being carried out by lots of different groups. But I want to make 3 arguments, and I'm going to ground it in some data. The first one is this idea that games are less about places where I can disseminate content and more about places where we can mentor literacies and cultivate dispositions. And so I think of them less as content disseminators and more as worlds where I can take on new identities and fail safely. In the previous game, it was around scientific investigation. In this one, I'm running through a world, collecting data, building arguments, and the teacher is giving me feedback about the nature of my argument as well as the essays that I write from that argument. And I'm going to talk about that more in a second. This work, funded by the Gates Foundation, allowed us to do some comparison studies in a really struggling district with kids who normally don't see themselves as academically inclined. And what we see in the top part of there is that when we give them a structured task, multiple choice, short answer, they significantly increased along with the control group, which was also a powerful condition, but with less consequentiality. But when we gave them a more open-ended essay prompt, we saw that the comparison group looked very differently than the experimental group. And in particular, we saw that the experimental condition brought forth constraints in framing their essays that were not shown by the students in the comparison group. And we're going to talk about that difference later as strong and weak dispositions, not just having literacies. Additionally, a second point that I want to make beyond this idea of cultivating kind of literacies backed by dispositions is the importance of ecosystem integration. Here is where teachers give feedback to kids both on their model and on their essays. And one of the things we found in that initial implementation is that teachers did not do a very effective job of really digging deeply about the relationship between evidence, inference, and model building. And so we developed a game for teachers around this idea of thinking critically with data that let them analyze their classroom, finding evidence, drawing inferences, and building arguments, so they got to experience some of the challenges that kids got. Additionally, they didn't do a very good job of giving kids iterative feedback on their essays to really get them to be convincing. So they became more of like, here's technically what was wrong, more focusing on the literacy and not, here's how your essay is convincing me, which focuses on the disposition. And so we developed a game around giving feedback. But a second point I want to make beyond this idea of the importance of mentoring literacies and cultivating dispositions and ecosystem integration is this idea, what this network is doing is it's pulling from the gameplay that the teachers are doing, leveling them up and giving them props they can give teachers. And then additionally, when they're implementing, it's pulling from the feedback they're giving kids to give them more props to support other teachers. So the idea is we're starting to put these bounded games as part of a larger trajectory that's bound up in multiple kinds of interfaces that follow me into my work instead of a professional training that just sits over here. And so we've been building longer trajectories with the idea that what we're trying to do is cultivate broader dispositions across multiple experiences that include multiple modalities. And I think that from a learning sciences perspective, that's where we need to go instead of thinking about bounded lesson plans or thinking about disseminating content. And that's the potential that game-infused platforms, systems, and trajectories kind of are hopefully going to unlock in the next century.
Thank you. Next, we have David Lowenstein from PBS Ready to Learn. He is the Senior Director of the Ready to Learn grant and responsible for a lot of that stuff that a lot of our younger kids get to play.
Thanks,
There
Gurley.
we go.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to start with 2 quotes. It was funny, Gurley's slides of the old-time magazine things. I mean, so much is still so true, and these quotes are from 30 years ago, but they still remain true today. So Henry Kissinger said, technology daily outstrips the ability of our institutions to cope with its fruits. very true today. And then Sherry Turkle said that we are living in a liminal moment, and we still are. She said that it's a moment when things are betwixt and between, when old structures have broken down and new ones have not yet been created. And this is particularly true in the area of early childhood education. Wow, this is going fast. So I really want to talk about three things and three game changers for early childhood. One is using digital games and transmedia as the catalyst for parent-child and teacher-student interactions to build the children's skills and support the adult's confidence in supporting those. Touchscreen devices and mobile apps, and location-based and camera-based gameplay. So the first is with adults. What we've learned from research from EDC and SRI and WestEd is that parents want ideas and activities and they want support and through gameplay. They can actually, they feel more confident about tackling these subjects and learning what their kids are doing and what they're struggling with, what the proficiencies that they're gaining are really a very helpful way. So at PBS Kids, we're concentrating a lot on parent engagement and learning analytics tools and reporting applications to parents and educators. And Jeremy Roberts later will talk about some of the work we're doing with CRESST around Progress Tracker. Co-play opportunities, again, kind of eliminating that barrier where parents are a little nervous about teaching their kids math when they can play a math game on with a co-play opportunity or get tips and ideas on how to extend that learning off screen through some of the gameplay is really powerful. So touch screens and mobile apps, it's really removing some of the barriers of the clunky mouse and keyboard. So this is already happening for several years.
For Daniel Tiger's neighborhood, they're places where kids
and we're going to hear from Sarah DeWitt about some touch screen
play
stuff.
around with cause and effect.
It's hard to talk with the tongue depressor in my mouth.
They can move things around. They can try to make their own pictures. It's a much more open experience.
So there's really great affordances with touch screens, get to the learning very rapidly, deeper learning, faster. Same thing with mobile apps. There's no longer a need for a young child to enter in a URL to get to a website or have their parent do it. Now they just click that icon on the screen and they're right there and the learning happens fast. And then finally, we see a lot of untapped potential with camera-based and location-based gameplay. Now kids don't have to be confined to a corner of a room with headsets on. They can actually get up and move around, and the evidence with augmented reality, with body input, is really showing a lot of promise in kids retaining information and being more motivated and wanting to repeat the play. And so that has a lot of promise. And of course, though, that comes all with a caveat that, let's listen to Sarah first.
Fly out of the roost and track down its mosquito meal.
So they have to pay really close attention to what that animal is doing. And I think that means that they go away from the experience with a better understanding of that animal and might make them pay more attention to other animals that they see, their behaviors and how they move. Because not only did they see it and observe it, they also got to be it.
Right. So the promise of these technologies are great, but we also always have to keep top of mind that children's privacy and protecting their data, protecting their location, not allowing young kids to share their locations with others, and not allowing the companies that are creating these great devices and the software to go on them to not allowing them to share that data. Staying COPPA compliant or better is critical. But if used responsibly, we think that these new technologies have the potential to be incredible tools for children and their learning guardians. Thanks.
Next, we have Dylan Arena from Kidaptive. He is the co-founder, and I'm so jealous about your title. You're Chief Learning Scientist. I don't think you would have had that title 30 years ago. But he has a background in cognitive science, philosophy, and statistics, and he has written and presented extensively around the area of game-based learning and next-generation assessment, and also a former Gordon Commission Fellow.
So many of you may know the great webcomic XKCD. I'm going to try to deliver a talk using only XKCD strips as slides. It might fail horribly, but I figure if there's an audience that might appreciate the humor, it would be you guys. And it's fun to try to run up the down escalator every once in a while. It is also good to be reminded that we are an innately curious people. We don't have all the answers, but we're all here in this room because we want to think about how games and technology and assessment could transform learning. I want to propose one possible answer for us to think about this morning: ubiquitous embedded assessment as a sort of intellectual chew toy. Kids today play tons of digital games. They engage with all kinds of great learning relevant content, including stuff made by you guys. But, and all of those interactions are evaluated to prepare the next interaction. So in a sense, kids today are being assessed either implicitly or explicitly all the time, which means ubiquitous embedded assessment is kind of already here. But what happens right now is that those contexts, they only ever get a glimpse of the learner, a tiny sliver of data with which to try to personalize their experience. And if you only have a sliver of data, you have to extrapolate to make any kinds of conclusions, and extrapolation is risky. So I want us to imagine instead that each of these continuous embedded assessments that are all ubiquitous in our kids' lives today are sources of evidence that are contributing their observations to a central repository that uses them to create and update a universal psychometric model of the learner. That model would be able to feed information back to the sources of evidence to help them adapt and better personalize the learner experience. It would also reveal interesting patterns that would allow teachers and parents and content creators to better support the learner. I understand that it's a daunting task to talk about a universal psychometric model, but as Nate Silver's recent triumph in the 2012 presidential election prediction game shows, mathematics is a really powerful thing, and I think we're up to it. I also think we can learn from face recognition technology. A couple years back, they realized that instead of using one exemplar photo of a person, or even multiple exemplars, you got better results if you averaged together a bunch of pictures of a person, and then used that to make your sort of predictions about whether that is or is not the person you really want to be looking at. I think we can do the same thing if we, instead of doing a single, one-shot, high-stakes assessment demanding maximal performance in one context, think about embracing an evolution in which we're working from lots of little low-stakes assessments, all faithfully capturing typical performance across a variety of contexts. Again, it's a ton of work, but I'm really interested in it. If you guys are interested in it all, I'd love to talk with you about it. That's my main goal here at the conference, is to talk with great folks about stuff like this. This isn't related to my talk at all, but Randall Monroe, he lent his strip as open for me to share, so I wanted to return the favor. This is a public service announcement about an internationally unambiguous way to write dates, and I think that's great. So that's all.